We're waiting for the stream to get moving and grooving on all of our different cylinders. So let's wait for it to hit. If you're not already familiar with this, we simulcast all over the place, but I needed to switch my audio over. So let's make sure that the stream is up before we get moving. Appreciate your patience on that. Having a little bit of a button problem today. All right, so looks like we are now live on all of the different streams. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler, and I am a criminal defense attorney. Over the course of many years, my team and I, we've represented thousands of people facing criminal charges, and so we've got a little bit of a skill set that we've developed in analyzing criminal cases, criminal laws, different statutes, different case law, different types of conduct, and that's applicable today because we see a lot of activity going on around our country as it pertains to criminal justice. The reason we talked about watching the watchers is because, unfortunately, as we've been representing people throughout our time in practice, we've seen a lot of misconduct, a lot of malfeasance, a lot of problems with essentially different factions of everybody involved throughout the justice system, in particular, police, prosecutors, judges, and politicians. And that's what we're talking about today. If you have taken a look at the thumbnail on this channel, today we're talking about Burisma. We're talking about Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and this entire saga that is unfolding before our very eyes. Now, a couple things I want to discuss before we dive into this. Number one, I know how hot of an issue this is. That has not escaped me. I understand that it is October 15th. We are like 2.5 weeks away from the election, and this is just causing everybody on both sides of the aisle to just almost melt down. We have the big tech media companies like Facebook and Twitter, which are limiting the distribution of this story. They're calling it fake news. They're saying this is not even based in reality. There's no facts surrounding this. And we're going to analyze that, right? We're going to analyze the data and the evidence that we do have to determine whether or not there is anything here. Is this smoke or is this fire? So we're going to do that analysis. And that's not lost on me that there are many people who say that we should not even be covering this story. Already have gotten some feedback on it saying that is fake news. You shouldn't even be talking about it. Well, that's for us to decide, quite frankly. We are intelligent enough to take a look at news articles and the news and what the media is telling us, and we can decide for ourselves, in my opinion. And so the real reason I wanted to cover this today, well, two really big reasons. Number one, if the tech companies are going to try to censor this information, then it kind of leads me to believe that there may be something there, that there may be actually something worth discussing, because I just don't have a lot of trust in their decision to make judgments for me about what types of stories I can read. When somebody else is deciding for me, saying that this is not real, that gets me a little bit concerned. Maybe I want to look into this and decide for myself because, quite frankly, I have a general distrust for authority and for the government and for anybody who would tell me that they know better than I do about what I should be thinking, reading, listening to, and processing in my mind. So that's a big reason I wanted to cover it. The other reason is now this is sort of evolved. This story originally was something that I didn't want to get near because it was all what we call in law hearsay. It was all just speculation, a lot of, rumors going around. The Republicans are, up in arms over this. Joe Biden's corrupt. Hunter Biden's corrupt. Everybody in that family's corrupt. They're selling our country out to China and so on and so forth. You've all heard of it. I've heard the stories in that viewpoint. And up until this point, there was no real data there. It was all just speculation. We heard the word Burisma. We heard a lot of this floating around, but we didn't have anything that we could analyze. We had no concrete documents. Well, that sort of changed. The New York Post, which many people are calling a tabloid, they're calling it fake news, but they've got some documents now. They actually have some documents. We're going to talk about the authenticity of those documents today on this show, but they have something. They have information we can look at. They have an invoice from a computer repair shop. They have a subpoena from the federal government, from a district court. They've got a number of different emails, which we're going to cover, which all look on the face of it to be pretty darn authentic. And so what is going on? If everybody's saying this is fake news, but we've got some information and we've got some people who are mostly credible, you can say that they're credible or not. People like Rudy Giuliani are saying that they've looked at these documents, they've tried to vet it, and so on and so forth. They're authentic. So how are we going to decipher this? So what we want to do is turn down the emotions a little bit. Let's turn down the politics and let's see whether or not there is anything actually substantive here. That concept of hearsay, I want to show you what that looks like and describe that just a little bit further, because a lot of this stuff is hearsay. There really is not a lot of concrete evidence. Well, there is some, but there is some other stuff that is missing. And so we want to learn what this term and what does hearsay actually mean. Just throw that word right into Google. You're going to see here that it says hearsay. According to the regular, common, everyday usage, it's information received from other people that one cannot adequately substantiate. So in other words, a rumor. That's the layman's definition of it. In law, what we're going to see is this is a report of person's words by a witness, which is usually disallowed as evidence in a court of law. The report of another person's word by a witness. So what does that mean when we're talking about law? So the example that I typically will give when I'm describing hearsay and how this works is, let's say you are in a fight with your spouse and the police show up and your spouse tells the police that you hit your spouse. Okay, so I hit my spouse. My spouse tells that to the police. All right, so I'm going to be charged with some sort of disorderly conduct or assault, domestic violence, something along those lines. I'm going to get charged with a crime. They're going to send me into court, right? If I want my day in court, I want a trial. I want to go forward and have the judge decide whether I'm guilty or not guilty. The way a trial would work is the government would need a witness to come in and describe that conduct. So they would need my spouse or my hypothetical wife, somebody in that position, to come into court and say, yes, Robert Gruler hit me, and that satisfies all of the different elements of the assault statute. They would need that. And so if my spouse came into court and took the stand and gave those statements, that would be my spouse giving a first-person account of what happened to her. Now, if my spouse does not want to come to court, says, I just called the cops because I was concerned, I was nervous, but really nothing happened. The cops charged me anyway with domestic violence, which happens all the time, by the way, all the time. We see this all the time. And I then say I want my day in court. I want a trial to go forward. Well, what happens is my spouse doesn't come to court because she doesn't want to participate in my prosecution. Again, this happens all the time. Many people call the police and they really regret it for good reason. But what ends up happening is, let's say now the prosecutor wants to try to convict me. So they bring in the cop to come in and tell the court about what my wife told the cop. So remember, my spouse is not in court with me. They're bringing in somebody else to talk about what my wife said. So the cop could come in and he would say, well, yeah, we know Mrs. Gruler's not here today. However, she told me, the cop, Mrs. Gruler told the officer that Robert hit her. So the cop would try to come into court and say that. He'd get on the stand and he would give that statement. And my defense attorney, rightfully so, would object. Say, objection, Your Honor, that's hearsay because my wife is not in court to testify. You need the person in court to testify. So this is just kind of how some evidentiary rules work. If my wife were in court, then I would get to cross-examine her. I would get to say, isn't it true that you were the provocateur? You were the one who aggravated, initiated the whole situation. Isn't it true? I could cross-examine, ask a bunch of questions, and we could really dive in and actually go through a trial and get to some meat and potatoes of that line of questioning. But if my wife's not there, I don't have that same opportunity with that police officer because he was not there. He did not witness. He did not see the physical act. He can only report what somebody else is reporting to him. So it's like almost like a game of telephone where one person is repeating one thing to another person to another person. And when you have that, and you have that sort of domino, those chain links running around, you're going to find that evidence is just less reliable. And our courts, our federal rules of evidence, they've got a lot of different rules about hearsay. Some things are considered not hearsay. Some things are hearsay, but they're excluded from the rules and we let them in anyways. And there's all sorts of complicated rules. But my point here is that we want to start to be looking for more direct material, more direct evidence. And up until this point, we almost had none of that. It was all speculation and it was all hearsay. But now we're starting to see some documents. We've got some documents that look like they've been authored by an actual court. And so this stuff is sort of moving forward and we want to go through it. So with that long introduction about hearsay out of the way, I also want to frame how we're going to analyze the rest of this case, at least in the show today. We are going to try to look at it in a light most favorable to the person or the people who are being accused, right? In this case, that's Hunter Biden and that's Joe Biden. So how can we give them the benefit of the doubt? Let's say that all of the evidence that we've gathered here, if there's any way to look at it, we want to look at it in a way that is most favorable to them, to Hunter and Joe Biden, because they are innocent, right? They haven't been proven guilty of anything. And in the United States, they deserve the same presumption of innocence as the rest of us. And so as this data is coming out, we want to make sure that we're viewing it most favorable to them and in their light. Now, we do have to talk a little bit about why now? Why is this coming up right now? We are just a few weeks away from an election. It's October, so we have the October surprise. Now, when this story came out, my first thought was, oh my goodness, this has to be, total nonsense. In large part because it's an October surprise, right? How could anything so juicy, so salacious get dropped right now? Who was sitting on these hard drives? Who was sitting on this information? And they just decided to release it a few weeks before an election. So immediately, those skeptical senses start just pinging. So this doesn't sound right. This sounds like this could easily be fabricated, or this evidence is, being contrived. Who knows? But the flags go off. The alarm bells start ringing. And so one of the first things I wanted to do is find what the other side is saying about this. What is the left? Are the Democrats saying about this? What are Joe Biden's people saying about this? Because we want to hear from them. If all these accusations are being made, what is their response going to be? And so literally right before I started the show, somebody posted on one of the comments or one of the scheduled thumbnails that we posted over on Facebook, and they shared an article from a website which is very clearly upset about the story. They're saying this is essentially fake news. So let's read through that so that we make sure that their perspectives are included here and that we're not being too one-sided. So let's take a look at this article. This article comes from I didn't put the author's name on there, unfortunately. Let's see if I can find that. It comes from the Daily Beast, I believe, is where we actually clipped this from. We'll put the link in the description when we update the show. But here's what it says. It says, everything about the Hunter Biden New York Post story came together, how it came together reeks. And I want you to read through this with me, or I'll kind of give you the highlights on it. But it says, let's start with the obvious. The Hunter Biden hit piece is not the smoking gun about his father's corruption. Revelations wouldn't even be incriminating on their own, which we are going to get to that. We're going to show you how sort of this all ties together, and then you can be the judge of that. They're saying it wouldn't be incriminating, but we may find otherwise. There are serious concerns about the veracity of the Post piece and its provenance. It's a naughty mess of a story. It's basically saying this is all conspiracy theories, international relations, about electoral politics, and so on. It's a desperate Hail Mary attempt to smear Joe Biden. Okay, so that's the introduction. Not really any new information there, or even any reasoning going on in that paragraph. The imbroglio, whatever that word is, began Wednesday when the tabloid reported that a top advisor to the Ukrainian energy company Burisma had emailed the younger Biden in 2015, thanking him for the opportunity to meet his father. We have a copy of that email, allegedly a copy of that email. For Donald Trump and his allies, the story was proof that Joe Biden used to help his son and the Trump world maintain the president, so on and so forth. So they're having this conversation, and they're saying that Trump tweeted this story congratulating the Post on its scoop, saying that this whole thing was disgraceful. But is this really a slam dunk, this article says? It says no. It's just a salvo of a president who would stop at nothing to tear down his opponent. So again, we've got no real reasoning. We've got no explanation as to why this data is bad or why this story is bad, but it's a lot of just kind of claims that this is all BS. Stories was already suspicious thanks to its timing. So just because it's in October doesn't mean that the story's bad, but it's also saying that there were errors contained and its false claim often put forth by Trump that Biden strong-armed the government of the Ukraine to fire a prosecutor, Viktor Shokin, who we're going to talk about here shortly. Washington Post points out that this guy was really already under investigation for corruption, and a lot of people wanted him gone, not just Joe Biden. The story's circuitous path it also undermines its credibility. The incriminating email came from Rudy Giuliani. So this is where we're going to get into this sort of everything's invalid because the messenger. We're going to kill the messenger, not the message. And because Rudy Giuliani has been the president's personal lawyer for a long period of time, he's been very pro-Trump. They're basically saying that this information is now invalid or it's tainted because of the fact that it came through Rudy Giuliani. I can understand that argument, but it's not a good one. So it comes from Rudy Giuliani, and he's been on a public quest to find dirt about the Biden's alleged misdeeds in Ukraine, which you're allowed to do, right? Both sides have entire camps and entire teams of people doing opposition research for the campaigns. That's just how campaigns work. So the fact that Rudy Giuliani is doing it is not out of the ordinary. Everybody's doing it on both sides of the aisle, and to deny otherwise is, I think, being dishonest. So they're saying that he's made many bedfellows with an array of shady characters. He's got a Ukrainian lawmaker who's believed to be a Russian agent. And then how did Rudy Giuliani even get his mitts on the email? As the story goes, he got a copy of it from John Paul Mac Isaac, who is the computer repair shop owner, which is where all of this information came from. Hunter Biden dropped off a laptop, contained the email, but then they go on and they want to kill the messenger again. But Mac Isaac's story itself is suspicious. It's riddled with inconsistencies. So they go through, they say that he gave this really bizarre interview yesterday after the story broke, saying that he was spouting off right-wing conspiracy theories. He was making various claims about what he had done to the hard drive, and that Giuliani was his lifeguard, and so on and so forth. So, again, they're saying the story reeks because they don't like the messengers, Rudy Giuliani, and this guy who actually operated the computer repair shop, John Paul Mac Isaac. So when we go over to the other article, so we're going to swap right now. We're going to switch over to the article. They referenced an article saying that John Paul Mac Isaac, who is the guy who received the computers from Hunter Biden or one of his assistants or whomever dropped them off, he's saying that that individual, the computer repair person, actually gave this bizarre interview. And they go through it a little bit. So in a different article, this one was posted by a different website, says that Mac Isaac appeared nervous throughout. Several times he said he was scared for his life and the lives of those he loved. He did not appear to have a grasp on the timeline of the laptop or its disappearance. So these are the problems with this individual being in possession of the evidence. Quick note on that. When we're talking about evidence and authentication, we want to be sure that the evidence is valid, right? That it is authentic, that somebody wasn't just typing these emails up in their home or on a word processor or something along those lines. We want to make sure that they're not fraudulent. And so there's a lot of different ways you can authenticate documents. You can cross-reference them. You can go back to the originals. You can have forensic experts take a look at digital files. You can look at all these different. There's a lot of ways to do it, but the point is, they're saying that this data is somehow bad because of the process that it went through. There's another concept in law called a chain of custody, and this is pretty important. The best way that we describe this is when we're talking about DUIs. Let's say that you get stopped for a DUI and they draw your blood. Okay, now your blood is going to be in two tubes of two different vials, and they're going to be taking those down to the police department, to the crime lab, wherever they do their analysis, and they're going to test them. They're going to put them into a gas chromatography machine. They may put them in the refrigerator to cool them down for a certain period of time and do things with that evidence. And when we're talking about a chain of custody, it's literally connecting from one person to another. So if I'm the stop officer and I drew the blood out of your arm and put it in the tube, then I got to sign off on it, and I got to connect the dots. I got to say, I had that, and now I gave it to this person. That person is going to transport the blood, and they're going to put it in the evidence locker. Then another person at the crime lab is going to take that blood out of the evidence lab, and they're going to take it into the actual lab where they're going to be doing the analysis. Then somebody else may touch it, and somebody else may touch it. And so what we're trying to do is show that chain, show that connection from one person to another. And if you're missing somebody in that chain, you're going to have evidentiary problems because that person could have done something to the evidence, right? It easily could have. They could have left it in their car. They could have done something with the blood. They could have mislabeled the vials or swapped the vials out. There's a number of different things they could have done. And so that's what we're talking about with this chain of custody. And that's kind of what this article is getting to. They're saying that the individual who was the recipient of the computers was off. He was a super pro-Trump guy. Somebody who, had a lot of weirdness, a lot of conspiracy theories, and says that the impeachment was a sham, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of where they're going with this. They're trying to show that the actual authenticity, the chain of evidence, the chain of custody of where this evidence went through is poor. Therefore, it should be considered to be unreliable, which is what it sounds like today. A lot of our mainstream media, Facebook and Twitter, are actually literally stopping this information from being shared. So this article goes back, and we see here that it says, he also said the impeachment of Donald Trump was a sham. Social media postings indicate he's an avid Trump supporter, voted for him in 2016. So we've got some bias there, right? We're looking at this in the light most favorable to the Bidens. He's got some bias there. He's clearly opposed to the Bidens. Max said he had a medical condition that prevented him from actually seeing who dropped off the laptop, which is also curious. He said he believed it to be Hunter Biden's because of a sticker related to the Beau Biden Foundation. And if you remember, that was Joe Biden's son who he lost. I think it was by brain cancer, unfortunately. May he rest in peace. He said that Hunter Biden actually dropped off 3 laptops for repair, an abundance of hardware that he chalked up to Biden's son being rich. Throughout the interview, Mac switched back and forth from saying he reached out to law enforcement after viewing the files in the laptop to saying that it was actually the FBI that contacted him. So his story is a little bit, flip-floppy there. I don't think it's a huge flip-flop, but it is, a little bit of an inconsistency. At one point, Matt claimed that he was emailing someone from the FBI about the laptop. At another point, he claimed a special agent from the Baltimore office had contacted him, and he alerted the FBI to the device's existence. At another point, he said the FBI reached out to him for help accessing his drive. So we've got some inconsistencies there, and they're saying the story doesn't match up. And if you want to analyze evidence properly, you have to look at those things. You have to take those into consideration. And so that's what that story is doing. And so that was just a reference. We're going to go back to the other article. I think it was from Vox that we found, indicating that that basically this evidence is just bad across the board. So he says that, let's go back over here. The supposedly incriminating email came by Rudy Giuliani, said that his misdeeds, said that there's another Ukrainian lawmaker who they believe to be a Russian agent. We go back to John Paul Mac Isaac, and so on. So this was the interview that was published by the Daily Beast, and we already covered that. So then as we're going to go forward, that's their version of the events. That's sort of in the light most favorable to the Bidens. They're saying that this evidence is tainted. It's not any good. Rudy Giuliani, on the other side, he's saying that they went through a lot of work, a lot of efforts to actually authenticate these documents. And this story was literally posted like 10 minutes before I hopped on here, and it comes from Epic Times. It says Giuliani details steps taken to authenticate Hunter Biden material. He says former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani says he spent 3 weeks authenticating the materials on the hard drive that allegedly belonged to Hunter Biden. Contents of the drive are subject to a series of explosive reports that shed light on the dealings between China and the Ukraine. Giuliani said that he checked that he and his attorney, Robert Costello, so we've got 2 attorneys now, checked some of the written notes in the drive against samples of Hunter Biden's handwriting, matched details about undisclosed meetings with confidential information they had already obtained from other sources, and they verified the email addresses in the data trove, among other steps. Giuliani said that the drive contains roughly 800 of Hunter Biden's personal photos, including some of which Giuliani alleges show illegal acts. The Epic Times could not independently verify the claim, as Giuliani declined to provide a copy of the files. So you've got kind of 2 stories here. You've got, one side saying that they did a pretty good job authenticating it. You've got other sides saying that this guy's crazy. And what can we do with that? Well, it's going to be up for you to decide, right? What's the credibility of the evidence, one way or the other? If you hate Rudy Giuliani and you think he's a liar, all of his efforts to authenticate the evidence are going to just fall on deaf ears. You're going to say, well, of course he's going to come up with that finding because he's highly biased. And that's one interpretation of the events. On the other side, how can he fake certain things like photographs? If the laptops come in and there's 800 personal photos on there, can you fake those? Did he download those from Hunter Biden's Facebook profile? Where did those come from? Those are photos. Very hard to fake those. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's probably unlikely, right? If we had to at least come to terms on that, it's probably unlikely that they faked those. Now, the rest of everything could be fake for sure. The idea that some random computer repair guy just happened upon 3 laptops and just walked those over to the FBI, and the FBI said, no, there's nothing here. And then he's, kind of fumbled around for a while, fearful of his life, running through conspiracy theories before he takes this over to Rudy Giuliani. That definitely sounds curious, definitely a little bit off, especially all happening right now on the verge of an election. So that is suspect, but is the data suspect? Now, you can draw your own conclusions on that, but there's a couple different ways to look at it. Now, let's go over to the actual story itself. So if we move over to the New York Post, this is this is what they actually had to say about it. So now we're going to dive into a little bit more of the substantive stuff. We're going to stop reading articles after this one. All right. So smoking gun email reveals how Hunter Biden introduced Ukrainian businessman to the VP dad. The computer was dropped off at the repair shop in Biden's home state of Delaware, which is where this computer repair owner was living. Other material extracted includes a raunchy 12-minute video that shows Hunter, who's had addiction problems, smoking crack while engaged in sex with an unidentified woman, as well as other numerous sexually explicit images. Again, pretty hard to fake that. So if that material is on this computer and it's legitimate and authentic, is it likely that somebody just took all of that stuff and threw it on a computer and then spammed some emails and kind of compiled this thing to look like a fake dossier of a treasure trove of pre-election material? Yeah, it's possible. And if somebody had the means and the wherewithal to do it, they probably would do it because there's so much at stake with this election. And so you have to consider that when you're deciding whether or not to trust the evidence. But is the evidence itself bad? If somebody compiled it and that was wrong, that's one thing. But if the evidence itself is bad or inauthentic, that's a different thing. And it's, in my mind, it's pretty difficult to fake a 12-minute sex tape. So we go back over to the story. The customers who brought in the water-damaged MacBook Pro for repair never paid for the service or retrieved it or a hard drive on which its contents were stored, according to the shop owner, when he repeatedly tried to contact the client. The shop owner couldn't positively identify the customer as Hunter Biden, but said that the laptop bore a sticker. We already heard that. And then the photos of a Delaware federal subpoena were given to the Post show that both the computer and the hard drive were seized by the FBI in December, after the shop's owner says that they alerted the feds to their existence. Now that is interesting, folks. If this stuff was so fake and so illegitimate, then why did the FBI issue a federal subpoena to get these documents? Why did that happen? So all the people saying that these are inauthentic, the FBI took a look at it and went through enough effort to go get a subpoena to secure these documents. Now, what do they do with it after the fact? Looks like a whole bunch of nothing, but this guy made a copy, and then that's what got sent over to Rudy Giuliani. So if you believe that sequence of events, that makes it sound much, much more probable, much more authentic, that he actually went to the FBI first before he went to Rudy Giuliani. The FBI didn't do anything with it, or maybe they're still investigating it. Who knows? But there's been a lot of issues with the FBI that is outside the scope of this video. So as we go forward, we're going to see that the computer repair shop individual actually had a receipt for this. And he says here, data recovery for the MacBook Pros, the attempted data recovery from 3 MacBook Pros, recover the data to store server and contact the customer when complete. Pretty inexpensive deal, $85. I don't know whose signature that is. Don't know if it's a Hunter Biden or what that looks like there, but it's certainly billed to him, Hunter Biden, with his phone number, and he's got an email address there. So presumably they could have done some verification on that and decided whether or not those numbers were legitimate. Now, again, this is pretty easy to fake, right? You could easily fake this. Just type this up in Word in any different document, and there you go. You've got a fake invoice. But what about this? So this is the United States District Court for the District of Delaware, and it is a subpoena to testify before a grand jury. You are commanded to appear at the United States District Court. We have a grand jury subpoena number, which should be cross-referenced, and so we should see this somewhere in the court records. We've got a response time. We've got where this is going to be happening, and it says you must also bring with you the following documents. This says specifically, in lieu of personal appearance, please see attachment A. Now, we don't have attachment A, but we know that this was signed off on by the clerk or the deputy clerk, the clerk of the court who issues the subpoenas, and is issued on December 9th. So the timeline seems to match up. And this is an official document, right? So somebody has to go in and request a subpoena. You don't just go in and fill out a form and just get a subpoena. There needs to be some evidence behind that. Why do you need this for? You're basically commanding that somebody turn over something to you. The court is going to go through some due process before they authorize that command. So this is something that is a lot less likely to be faked. And this particular document, you can cross-reference this. You can find this. I haven't done that personally, but there are records that a subpoena was requested, drafted. This is a subpoena number. So all of this information can be found. And if the FBI wants this document, that tends to indicate that maybe there's some legitimate stuff on there. Maybe they want to investigate it because they really want to see if there's any crimes or if there's any other potential for a compromise of national security. There's all sorts of reasons why they would want this. And they would want something if it were legitimate, if it were authentic. Now, maybe they reviewed it and determined it wasn't authentic, but we haven't heard from them on that. And we haven't heard much about that at all. I haven't heard that anybody's saying that the evidence or the information here is totally illegitimate. They're just really sort of impugning the basis for it, the motivation behind aggregating all this material together, especially so close to the election. Let's talk about Burisma. Burisma itself is a company that is based out of the Ukraine. It's actually not just one company. It's a pretty big company. So if you look this up on Wikipedia, you'll see that it's a private company predominantly operating in the oil and gas space. We've got a founder and we've got all these different subsidiaries. So a lot of moving parts as part of this organization. Looks like they made about $400 million at one point. I think that was last year, but it's a private company. So you can't see a lot of their financial controls, which means it's private, right? So they can hire anybody they want. They can pay them whatever they want. They can move money around. They're not beholden to the stock market. There's a lot of sort of coverage that they have to keep a lot of their financial information private, to keep it non-disclosed. And that certainly helps when you're talking about moving money around and paying off bribes in order to stop prosecutions and all that type of stuff. Now, that's just a coincidence. Doesn't actually point to anything, but it is important to note, I think. So the management of the company, you can see here, we've got a CEO, we've got Alan Apter, chairman of the board of directors. There were a number of different board of directors, all of these different people. Former president of Poland joined the board. Former director of the Counterterrorism Center for the CIA is on board. During the Bush administration, we've got the daughter of Mykola, somebody who's appointed. And then we've got Devon Archer and we've got Hunter Biden, who both joined together right around 2014, April 2014. And so what are the real allegations here? So there's a lot of moving parts, and every single day, every single hour, actually, it seems like there is new information coming out, new disclosures, new bombshells. New York Post has 50 different articles on there sort of detailing this slow roll, slow drip of new information that is coming out. And so I want to just take a quick moment to talk about the high level overview of what is going on. What is the allegation? And we're going to go over to a diagram to do that. So this is the sort of the main, these are the main people who are involved in this entire case. Let's move myself over here. Let's talk about each one of these individuals. All right. So when we rewind the clock, we're going to know that Joe Biden was the vice president, right? This is pretty obvious to everybody. Joe Biden was the vice president for a long period of time, 8 years when Barack Obama was in office. Now, as the vice president goes around the world and meets with different world leaders and does a lot of the glad handing that the president himself or herself does not want to do. And so this is the situation that we're dealing with. Now, we have a different company called Burisma. Burisma, I just showed you. We talked about the management. We talked about what they do. They're an oil and gas company in the Ukraine. And the individual who we're talking about here, his name is not actually Victor Shokin. His name, we're going to see his name. His name is very similar, but you can say I just copied and pasted that. So that's wrong. We'll fix that. But that's not his name. This is an individual who works for Burisma. And prior to Hunter Biden coming onto the board of directors, so Hunter Biden actually joins the board of Burisma. Hunter Biden, we're going to go through the timeline here in a little bit, but I want to give you the high-level overview. So before we start talking about when all this stuff happened, let's talk about sort of what happened. So we have this individual from Burisma. Hunter Biden gets on to Burisma. On the board, he's paid, some astronomical amount, something like, $80,000 or $50,000 a month, something just incredibly high for his role as a consultant. And his role as a consultant, he acknowledges by his own statement in a video, is basically because he's the president's son. He's got no experience in oil and gas, very little experience in foreign affairs. He had just gotten booted out of the Navy, discharged from the Navy. So, not really the cream of the crop that you'd want on a board unless it was for some other reason, which we'll get into. So we have this relationship going on. Hunter Biden joins the Burisma board. Then shortly after that happens, this gentleman actually sends an email over to Hunter Biden saying, hey, we've got something urgent that we need to talk about. Well, what does he want to talk about? His company is being prosecuted by this guy, by Viktor Shokin. So Viktor Shokin is the head Ukrainian prosecutor, sort of analogous to our attorney general here in the United States. We have Viktor Shokin. Viktor is just under a barrage of different claims that he's involved in corruption and other malfeasance and other misconduct. And so he's investigating Burisma for who knows what. Doesn't really matter. It's not really that important to the story. He's investigating them. And so Viktor Shokin then sends an email over to Hunter Biden and says, listen, we have this Victor guy breathing down our necks. We need to talk to you urgently about this entire situation. So Hunter Biden doesn't really respond to that. We just see the emails going one direction over to Hunter Biden. Shortly thereafter, we understand that there are a series of meetings that take place, and Joe Biden actually at some point has an official meeting with Petro Poroshenko, who is the Ukrainian president. So Joe Biden is doing his vice presidential duties, traveling around the world, meeting with people. He meets with Petro, and then Petro suddenly, we're going to hear a clip from Joe Biden himself about the conversation that they have, but shortly after that meeting, things in the Ukraine start to change a little bit. So we get a lot more pressure on Viktor Shokin. Viktor Shokin now is under fire from the parliament. He sort of kind of half resigns, but doesn't really. It kind of looks like he resigns, but then he's on paid administrative leave, and he's kind of bouncing around the government for a while until the parliament of the Ukraine actually boots him out. So now, once he's booted out, he's replaced with another prosecutor who shortly thereafter reviews the case against Burisma and drops the charge. So actually it says that we're going to stop investigating them. So it starts with this investigation going towards Viktor Shokin. Then Viktor Shokin contacts Hunter Biden. Then Hunter Biden, presumably, the allegation here is that he contacts Dad. He says, hey, Dad, we've got some issues going on in the Ukraine. I'm making $50,000 a month over here. Can you help us out with this? Joe Biden talks to Petro. Petro then makes some moves in his government and ousts Viktor Shokin. Viktor Shokin goes away. A new prosecutor comes into play, and now we have the prosecution against Burisma actually stop. Hunter Biden did his job, and everything is good. That is the allegation. And again, very, very top level stuff. Now, the Democrats, of course, their version of what happened here is that this was all just normal, ordinary course of business stuff. We have the Ukrainian president who was already working on getting rid of the prosecutor. That prosecutor was already under fire for a long period of time. Basically, everybody in the international community wanted him gone. He was not a good guy. And so he's gone. And the new prosecutor came in, investigated Burisma, found that there was no wrongdoing, dropped the charges because it was a political prosecution anyways, and stopped the investigation entirely. So what's wrong with that? There's no malfeasance there. That's their entirety, and that's a perfectly valid explanation, right? It would be something that would happen just in the general operation of a government, in the general transfer of power. You have, attorney generals come and go. And look what we've gone through in this country. We've had Mueller, we've got Durham right now. We've got all of these different prosecutors doing their investigations. Sometimes things come of it, sometimes they don't. It's just a standard way that things work. So that's kind of how these two camps are. One says it's just this massive, infestation of corruption. The other just says it's the ordinary course of business, and there's nothing really to see here. But what really is going on? And so let's go through the timeline a little bit. We've already covered some of this. We know that in February that Hunter Biden was actually discharged from the Navy. Shortly thereafter, just a couple months after that, he joins the board of Burisma. And a quick note on this. Listen, it's just Faith and I doing this research, and we do it very, very quickly. Okay, we do it quickly because I've got a full-time job as a lawyer running a law firm. And so we put this stuff together quickly. We do our very best, but there may be errors in here. There may be dates that are wrong. There may be some things that we just missed. And you're going to see some question marks in here also because there are just some dates yet that we just haven't found. So I'm just asking, if you see something that is wrong, fact check me. Leave a comment, send me an email, send them to tips@rrlawaz.com. I'll look at them. I looked at the post. I read the article from the woman who was upset that I was even talking about this. I love to present both sides. And quite frankly, I would love to be wrong about this. I would love for Joe Biden to not be doing the things that are being alleged against him, because it's our country, and I don't want him doing things that are hurting our country. And quite frankly, I also believe in the presumption of innocence. So if the evidence is bad, we have to presume he's innocent here. We can't just jump to conclusions and say that he's not. So I do my best to present both sides of the argument. I am going to make mistakes. Faith and I, we try our very best, but appreciate some of your understanding on that. All right, so let's go back to the slide. So we have this here. We've got Hunter Biden is discharged from the Navy a couple months later. 2 months later, he actually joins the board of Burisma. Then thereafter, we get an email from the guy who his name was wrong in the previous slide, but his name is Vadim. I think it's actually short for Vladimir. And so this is what he says. So this is where the New York Post story really kind of sort of broke. The first email that we get looks like this. And let me move myself up over here. So we have Vadim Harsky. So this is the guy who actually works for Burisma. We had his photograph over there. This is the Burisma sort of colleague. He says, "Dear Hunter and Devin," remember, those are the two new recruits to the board of Burisma. "Following our talks during our visit, I would like to bring the situation to your attention. As previously noted on a number of occasions, the representatives of new authorities in power tend to quite aggressively approach NZ unofficially with the aim to obtain cash from him." So that's obviously somebody's name. "Initially, it was done with the representatives of the Svoboda Party, the Ministry of Internal Affairs." We're talking about inter-country politics here. "These so-called unofficial communications would entail blackmailing. In case we don't cooperate, provide money to cash in, so on and so forth, we're going to be really hurt by it. It's important to note that Svoboda Party is represented by the government, by the general prosecutor, and by the Minister of Ecology and Natural Resources of the Ukraine." Who is that? Who is the general prosecutor? We already talked about that, right? That's that guy named Shenko. "The last organ together with the state geological blah, 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 which is directly subordinated." He goes on. He's sort of detailing out the power structure, how this is all connected. He says, "After unsuccessful attempts to receive funds from our side, they proceeded with concrete actions." So he's explaining right here in this email that they're essentially being blackmailed by the Ministry of Ecology, by the Minister of Ecology, the General Prosecutor, and all these different entities. He says, "So far, we got information through unofficial channels that one or more pretrial proceedings were initiated by the Ministry of Internal Affairs." Okay, so now they're being actually prosecuted. That's what that means. There's pretrial proceedings that are coming forward. The Internal Affairs Department in the Ukraine is now going after Burisma Holdings, and they're heavily engaged in gas production. Those are the holdings the holdings' key companies. The ministry contacted the ministry and so on, and they said that they wanted to contain all documents concerning licenses that were issued since 2006 until now. So they want to go back and review all of their different licenses. Apart from that, they would unofficially approach our partners, clients, suppliers, trying to intimidating them and to stop working with our companies. These are the typical instruments used to destabilize business. We urgently, so this is going over to Hunter Biden, remember, we urgently need your advice on how you could use your influence. Whoa, there it is. Use your influence to convey a message, signal, to stop what we consider to be politically motivated actions, bearing in mind the following. Burisma Holdings is a leader. Our primary client is this. We cover 60% of its gas needs. Our clients are largely dependent on our work and their production is. We employ hundreds of employees. Negative influence will result in a multi-level negative social, economical, and political consequences. Please advise. Look forward to your reply. So that's his name, Vadim Harsky. And again, let's take a look at this email, right? Where did this come from? So we see on May 12th at 8:29, it went to Devin Archer at rosemontcapital.com. It went to Hunter Biden at rosemontseneca.com. Comes over from Gmail, urgent issue. So presumably there's going to be an email header on here. You know, if this is actually sent through a piece of software like Outlook or even Gmail, if they had the ability to log into these things, or if there was cache files on their computer, they may be able to look at the headers and see where this came from and how it was routed. And there we have expert witnesses that we consult with on these types of cases to verify and authenticate this type of data. But my point is, if it's an email, you can authenticate that stuff, especially if you've got the original hard drive, or you can at least have somebody analyze it and say, yeah, this is probably probably pretty authentic. You've also got some other emails, so you've got some other servers you can look at and some other records if they could go and get subpoenas for those documents or from those companies. Each one of those companies, of course, is going to fight back against those subpoenas, and so getting that data can take a lot of time, but if this is authentic, it should be out there. Now, we're going to keep going forward, and I want to go back to the timeline. So as a quick reminder, when we talk here, we're going to see that he was discharged, then he went to join the board, and then we got the email from Vadim to Hunter Biden, right? And this is where he's saying, look forward to your supply. Please let me know how you can use your influence to convey a message to stop what they are doing against our company. So we go from the email from Hunter Biden, and then shortly after, we have a golf outing. So in May, that email goes out. Hunter Biden, presumably, or somebody, sets up a golf outing between everybody, between the president, between Hunter Biden, and between Devon Archer. So these are sort of the four who are, from what we can gather, a part of Burisma, absent Joe Biden. Hunter Biden is now on the board. Devon Archer is now on the board, and they're out golfing in the Hamptons. And many people are saying, well, you can't, it's just a golf trip. You can't read anything into that. Maybe they weren't even in the Hamptons. Maybe that's not where it was. Well, Fox News, and you can shoot them, if the messenger from Fox News if you want. But they're saying that this was all corroborated by Biden being in the Hamptons and by contemporaneous articles supporting that. So they actually pulled up another article. This one was written by Daniel Halper, August 12, 2014, which corroborates that. It says the Bidens are arriving today in the Hamptons. They start their third vacation in the month. Joe Biden is arriving to spend a week in the Southampton area, and so on and so forth. So we know he's there. We're able to see that he's actually golfing now with some other people who are on the board of Burisma, probably talking business. But who knows, right? I'm not a golfer. I don't really know what happens on the golf courses. So we're gonna continue to move forward. Let's go back to the timeline, because there's more we can tease out of this before we dive into some of the comments here. Thanks for your patience on that. So we go back to the timeline. Now we see that there was a golf outing, and then presumably some sort of a meeting took place, right? Something must have happened here, because shortly thereafter, we get a thank you email. And that thank you email looks like this. It was actually on April 17th. So again, we have a date that's wrong on our slide, but on April 17th, so shortly after this, April 17th, 2015, the same guy, Vadim Pozharsky, sends an email. He says, "Dear Hunter, thank you for inviting me to DC and giving an opportunity to meet your father and spend some time together. It's really an honor and a pleasure. We spoke yesterday evening. Would be great to meet today for a quick coffee. What do you think? Come by your office somewhere around noon. Best, V." Right? And again, we've got another email. We've got more headers we can take a look at. We've got more server records, server logs. We can actually dive into those records to see if that happened. So when we go back here, we're going to see that there was some sort of meeting took place between the golf outing in August and the meeting that took place, or the follow-up email that happened on April 17th. And then the same type of thing, but we don't know when these took place. When was that meeting? When was the meeting with the Ukraine president? That's kind of the next thing we want to talk about, because this just continues to sort of get more intertwined as we go forward. So then there's another meeting with the Ukrainian president. And the question is, well, how do we know that he met with the Ukraine president? Well, he's the vice president. We kind of know where he is. And so there are other records and other logs that show that he was, on those foreign trips, and he was interfacing with these other people from around the country. Now, we don't even have to look to those records, because Joe Biden himself, there's a clip where he's talking specifically about what happened here. He's talking, and we're going to play it right now, about this conversation where he's over at the Council of Foreign Relations, and he actually gave this talk January 23rd, 2018. So he's reflecting back on what happened during the meeting with the Ukrainian president. And so here's what he has to say about it, because he describes it in his own words. Now, remember, we're talking about a situation where there's a Ukraine president and there's a prosecutor who's investigating Burisma. You have those three parties. What Joe Biden's going to talk about is that he talked to the Ukrainian president and said, if you don't get rid of that prosecutor, what we're going to do is we're going to withhold, the United States is going to withhold $1 billion in aid that would ordinarily be going to the Ukraine. We're not going to give it to you unless you do what you want, unless you fire that prosecutor who is investigating Burisma. Now, he could have had a million other reasons for wanting that prosecutor gone. He could have. Or he could have had one reason, which was Hunter Biden asked him to make this happen because the people who were his clients, the people who he's on the board with, needed this to happen. They were under investigation. All of their licenses were under scrutiny, and they needed to make sure that this stopped. So it could be the circle that we just diagrammed or not. Joe Biden could have had a perfectly legitimate reason, part of American conversation, American foreign interests, that we wanted this person gone because it was jeopardizing our national security or whatever it was. I'm sure, without any question of a doubt, that Joe Biden maybe already has identified a different reason for why he wanted that prosecutor gone. But this is the evidence that is now out there indicating that he did put pressure on the president to make a change in that prosecutor. And here's what he says about that specifically.
I said, no, I'm not going to, or we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid at the time.
Yeah, and so at that actual conversation, what we see is that my understanding is when he was given this conversation in 2018 that there was some disclosure issues about whether his son was on the board of that company. He did not, in other words, disclose that he had some ties to that same Ukrainian company, which was under investigation by Shokin. So you can just see there's an appearance of impropriety there, right? You can at least acknowledge that argument that if he's in there strong-arming the president of the Ukraine saying, you better get rid of this prosecutor or that $1 billion that was promised you is not coming your way, that is an appearance of impropriety. And if Joe Biden comes out and says, yeah, I didn't know anything about this connection, I had no idea. When we were golfing, we just were talking about, grandkids and those types of things. I had no idea about any of this Burisma stuff. You can decide if you want to believe that or not, right? He's out there golfing with several of these people. Maybe a couple years later, he goes and he gets rid of this. He strong arms that Ukrainian president. That prosecutor now is gone. Doesn't look so good. So the next step in the timeline is that prosecutor now goes away, right? Joe Biden told us he met with him and that he was gone. And we do know that Shokin was ultimately fired. It says that on March 28th, protesters called for his firing after he was being investigated. He was formally dismissed in a parliamentary vote on March 29th, 2016. The European Union, the EU, praised his dismissal due to lack of tangible results, also because his office, people were being investigated, and then he went into retirement. Right. And so that's the alternative to the argument. People are saying, well, guy was a bad guy anyways. Joe Biden didn't want him in there because he was interfering with U.S. foreign policy, U.S. relations. There's some evidence for that, right? There's some evidence to support that. And when we put the entire timeline together, this is really what it looks like. And we can see here that there are a couple areas where we don't know what the answers are. We don't know exactly when that meeting took place. You may know. If you do know and you've found some evidence of that, I'd love to know. And we will update this accordingly. We're going to fix this typo. We're kind of doing this on the fly. So it's a work in progress, and I'm asking for your help on it. When did the meeting with the Ukraine president happen? When did the new prosecutor start? Was there any formal declaration that the investigation of Burisma was over after the new prosecutor came into play? So I don't know that yet, and that would be good to know. Why did the new prosecutor actually stop the investigation of Burisma? If that's true, right? Sounds like it was true, but I haven't seen any formal documents to that effect. Same with the meeting with the Ukrainian president. Has he given a statement on that? And did this meeting take place? So we know that Vadim, was sending emails back and forth, sent one email to Hunter saying, hey, we got to talk about this, and sent another email presumably after they talked about it, saying, hey, it was great to meet with your father, and thanks for setting that up, in other words. Then, as soon as these different dominoes fall into play, exactly what Burisma wants happens. Shinko is out, new prosecutor starts, and the investigation of them is over. Is there a legitimate explanation for that? Probably. Is there a potential illegitimate explanation for that? Sure. Yeah, but we just don't know enough right now. Let's take a look at the U.S. code. So you now know the facts. There are other facts. There are probably new information that came out literally as I've been speaking for this last hour. And so this is something that's happening very quickly, but we're just laying out the framework and we'll continue to discuss it. Maybe there's nothing to discuss. Maybe the whole thing is a fraud and a hoax and fake news, but starting to kind of not look like that in my mind. All right, so let's take a look at U.S. code. We're talking specifically about 18 U.S.C. 201, bribery of public officials and witnesses. So if we need to talk about, was there any criminality here? We certainly have to talk about what the law says. So the law here under this section of the U.S. code defines a couple things. It says this is what public official means. And so Joe Biden, Hunter Biden are presumably, Joe Biden for sure is a member of Congress, was a member of Congress, but he is an officer, an employee, or a person acting for or on behalf of the United States for any department, branch, government thereof. So Joe Biden falls into that account. And, the question here is going to be, did Hunter Biden fall into this account, fall into this category? Was he sort of engaged in any official function? Well, not really. Right? I mean, he really wasn't. He was not part of the government. He was sort of an extension of the government to some degree because he was sort of kind of peddling influence for his father, but he wasn't an official. He wasn't a public official under this definition, just from this quick light reading of it. He hasn't been selected to be a public official. He hasn't been nominated or appointed. He just joined a board. Official act means any decision, any action that may be brought before any public official. Again, he's really not a public official. So Joe Biden doesn't fall into that, or Hunter Biden doesn't really fall into that category, but Joe certainly does. And the question is going to become, well, if Joe Biden is a public official, is it potential, could he be suspect for a potential bribery charge under the U.S. code? When we read down a little bit further, here's what it actually criminalizes. So we know who we're talking about, this public official. Joe Biden would fall into that camp. But what are they doing? So if they are either directly or indirectly, okay, so it doesn't have to be direct, so they could basically use a third party that they're going through. If they corruptly give, offer, if they promise anything of value to any public official, or offers or promises any public official or any person, anything of value to another person with the intent to influence any official act, or to influence a public official to commit or aid in committing or collude in or allow any fraud or make opportunity for the commission of any fraud on the United States, to induce such public official or such person to do or omit to do any act in violation of the lawful duty of such official person. We can go on to the next section. We can see here that being a public official, a person selected corruptly demands, seeks, receives, accepts, agrees to receive, or accept anything of value personally or for any other person or entity in return for being influenced in the performance of any official act, being influenced to commit or aid in committing or to collude in or to allow or in any fraud or make any opportunity for the commission of a fraud on the United States, being induced, and so on and so forth. So that's just 18 U.S. code, right? And so how do you read that statute? Depends on what side of the aisle you're on. If you were on the right side of the aisle, you're going to read that statute and say, yeah, 100% clearly, right? Hunter Biden was going through Burisma. He was getting paid $50,000 a month with no experience. Basically, the only reason he's on that board is his access to Joe Biden. He used that access, which is now documented in emails. You can say they're authentic or not. If you're on the right, you're going to say they're authentic. We're going to find out pretty soon whether they are or not. So if they're not, then this story is going to go away pretty quickly. But if they are, and Hunter Biden is peddling his father's influence, his father is indirectly receiving some benefits for his family in terms of them getting paid, and he is really interfering with U.S. foreign policy for a personal benefit. He's potentially jeopardizing our relationship with the Ukraine over $1 billion in funding in order to secure a benefit for his son. You see that conflict of interest there? Doesn't look good. But on the other side, if you're left, if you're a Democrat, if you're somebody who thinks this is all fake news and this is all just Republicans bloviating, then you could easily identify some other areas where Joe Biden was just operating legitimately, where he just was, this was part of what politicians do, right? They go around the world and they negotiate with different world leaders. And this may have been something that Joe Biden would have done just regularly in the ordinary course of business. There's no malfeasance here. There's no misconduct. There's no, all of these allegations are nothing but October surprise, Republican BS trying to impugn otherwise lawful transaction. And that's what they're saying. But we're going to see what happens, right? More and more of this information is going to come out. The story was just breaking yesterday, and we're already seeing more and more information. The New York Post, every hour or so, has new stuff that's being posted, and Facebook and Twitter are doing their very best to make sure that we don't see any of it. So these stories are being censored all over the place. Facebook and Twitter block post expose on Hunter Biden files. Social media goes all in for the Dems. And this is concerning, right? I mean, this is something that is troubling, I think, for everybody. Left, right, neither, whatever you are. This is concerning when the news is essentially insulting people so much to say that we can't even show you this story because you're so stupid that you can't even decide if this is real or fake, or if there's any legitimacy here. You can't even read it because it's so dangerous and you're so dumb. But because we know you're so dumb, we're going to give you this other story instead. We're going to give you this one. You can trust this one because this one we vetted for you. Idiot. Read this one. Don't read this one. And it's mind-bogglingly insulting. I don't know why people put up with it. I don't know why they keep using these platforms. I know they're private platforms. I'm on Twitter all the time, but it's frustrating that they think that we're so incompetent that we can't even decipher what's real or what's not. We want to just talk about these things and flesh out both sides of the equation, which is exactly what we're trying to do here. And so the big question is going to be, well, what does Joe Biden have to say about this? What does his administration, or what does his campaign have to say about this? Are they going to come out and just say, yeah, look, we know, we talked to Hunter Biden, we talked to the Burisma people over there, total nonsense. All of this stuff's fabricated. You can easily just come up with a Word document, just type these things up. It's not legitimate. They could say that, right? And they kind of have. So we have a clip from Joe Biden's press secretary, national press secretary. The Biden campaign said they had no problem with Twitter and Facebook censoring the Post reporting on the business dealings. They said that they were glad that the censorship happened because they say the article is not true. Let's see what he has to say. I'm not going to try to rephrase his words. We have a clip. So let's go through. This is his national press secretary, Jamal Brown. Let's see what he has to say.
I think Twitter's response to the actual article itself makes clear that these, purported allegations are false and they're not true. And glad to see social media companies like Twitter taking responsibility to limit misinformation.
Okay, so he kind of says that they're not true, right? Reported allegations are false and they're not true. And glad to see social media companies taking responsibility to limit information. So if that's a statement from his campaign, it's all not true. All this stuff is just false. I'd be curious to know a little bit more specifics on that, right? Are all the emails false? Are the photos false? What's false? Everything? Nothing? Some things? Is any of it authentic? Is there anything we should be talking about here at all? Or not? All right. That's it for me today. Let's talk to the chat. Let's pull up the chat. Let's see what is going on. See if anybody has any questions in there. All right, let's hop on over there. We got a lot of people joined in. Up the chat. Let's see what kind of a hot topic. All right, so let's get moving. All right, so if you got any questions, fire them up. When I watch a conservative video on YouTube, an anti-Trump ad comes up. Is that me? Is this a conservative? Is this a conservative video on YouTube? I tried not to make it a conservative video. I tried to just analyze both sides of it and give you some facts as we see them. Let's see here. Linda Smith says, just remember, Twitter never shut down speech that unicorns exist. Yeah. All right, we got the chat booted up there. All right. Biden has been corrupt for 47 years. Gigi says we should impeach our entire government, which I could support that. There's really not a whole lot of people left in government that I'm particularly enamored with. Big Tech is doing a full-blown Biden backing. That comes from Hilly Dilly. It feels like that. It's just kind of insane. Go to Facebook, and then there's a live stream about it to explain all your questions. Can hiding the news be considered election interference? It's a great question. I mean, I haven't looked at the election interference statutes per se. I haven't looked at them, but I mean, I think the answer is no, right? These news agencies you have the freedom of the press. You have the ability for them to cover what they want to cover. Many of these companies, they have all the freedoms that all of the press has. And if they don't want to cover something, they don't have to cover something. And, I'm mostly a free government, free market type of person. And if Facebook wants to control their platform, it's hard for me to really say, well, if there's anything we can do about that, right? Other than not use it. Auditing America says it definitely is more conservative than liberal. However, I think anyone with a brain would see that you look at things from a law-based mindset. Yeah, I try to just hash out both sides. Being a moderate is the same as being far right as far as YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook are concerned. Yeah, I think that's probably true. The worst part of this, I've not seen any coverage this afternoon about ACB's hearing today. Yeah, hey, Greg in Houston too. That question comes from you. So I was going to cover Amy Coney Barrett on the show today. Quite frankly, I flipped through the SCOTUS hearings. She was almost asked no questions today. She was asked a lot, or basically she's not asked questions. Today was a lot of the people parading around with different witnesses, sort of talking about whether she's qualified or not. The substance that we got was on the show yesterday and the show the day before that on Tuesday, because that's where she was actually answering questions. These hearings, by and large, are just kind of a big showpiece. A lot of the senators like to just get up there and bloviate about Lord knows what. So I didn't want to spend a lot of time on it because there's just not much there. I think she's going to get confirmed pretty handily. They're going to vote on it shortly, and that's why we didn't cover it. Zulu drops in with a super chat. I didn't even know we had that on. Thanks, Zulu. He says, hi, Faith. We always like to say hi to Faith. She's back there in that other room helping me with my PowerPoints as we go right on the fly. So thank you, Zulu. And that was Faith chiming in back, says, thanks, Zulu Zeit. All right. So Eric Twog says, was she even there? I didn't see her as I scanned the video. She may not have even been there. I did not see her. I saw all the different senators talking to all the different witnesses, just kind of, a throwaway day of the hearings. If she's not answering questions, I don't really care to hear from the senators. I don't care to hear from the witnesses. I want to hear from her. And that's what we covered on the show. Since we're not hearing from her today, didn't want to cover it. We'll cover more of it when there's some more activity on that. Yeah, Rex Smith says she's not answering questions anyways. It's a waste of time to ask her questions. That's not a shot at her, but that's what's happening. Yeah. So Ma the Fox says, did you have time to check out the Michigan governor, Whitmore, ignoring the ruling from the Michigan Supreme Court? Yeah, so I'm looking into, I'm still going into the Michigan case. So we've got two things coming out of Michigan. We've got the kidnapping plot, and we've also got the sort of the refusing to comply with the government order about the lockdown. So I am going to cover both those. I just have not gotten to it yet, Ma the Fox. They are on my list. Thank you. Auditing America says at Zulu Zeit is always in here. Respect. Yeah, he is always here. Love to have you here. And Auditing America, you're here also a lot too. I appreciate that. Navy SEAL, Angry Widow of Navy SEAL says she was not there. They would not allow her there, which was not right. What do you think about giving the power of removal to the Supreme Court instead of the Senate? So what kind of removal are you talking about? Are you talking about removing Supreme Court judges from the Supreme Court or another type of removal? The pictures speak louder than the words. How could she not be confirmed? Way overly qualified. Yeah, I think she's going to be confirmed. I think it's basically a no-brainer. I think after day one, we were able to see that she's not going to get rattled. Her resume, her credentials are just immaculate. And I think it's going to be a no-brainer. And Ted Cruz actually pointed that out yesterday during the confirmation hearings, said, look around. All the Democrats who were in here yesterday, they're not here anymore. Where'd they go? Well, they know that the game is over. Patricia Nab with another super chat. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. As does Miss Faith. Why are anonymous sources and illegal leaks allowed by social media against President Trump, while stories against Biden are censored with clear merit. Yeah, and that question comes from Long Hunter, and it's a great question. I think it's actually spot on. It's part of the reason why I wanted to spend some time covering this story. So, every time that it comes to Trump and him disavowing certain things, and the media will beat him up over this stuff. Do you condemn white supremacy? Are you sure you condemn white supremacists? Are you a neo-Nazi? Are you sure you're not a neo-Nazi? It's just like nonstop barrage. But when Joe Biden's on the spotlight, is anybody in the media asking him these questions? Hey, what about Hunter Biden? What about your son? Was he peddling influence for you in the Ukraine? Is anybody asking him that? I just haven't seen it. So there's a massive double standard here. In fact, they're not even asking him the questions. They are limiting the information from being spread on the different social media channels. It's wild. And how many Americans are not going to hear about these stories because the tech companies are actually limiting access to information? It's a scary thought. Ma the Fox says, awesome. Thanks for the update. Love the content as usual. Keep it up. Appreciate you. Thank you for being here. Really enjoy your show, man. I lost it. We really enjoy your show, man. Really appreciate you and your knowledge you are able to give us. That's from Auditing America. Thanks, Auditing. I appreciate that. Yeah, I have a lot of fun with you guys. I appreciate you back. I mean, this is stuff that I love to talk about. I think it's super important. I think that the more people who are having these conversations and thinking about these issues and just, enlisting public support to go out and enact some change, we got to be talking about these things before they're going to get any better. So I appreciate that. MC Nello says, I work in criminal defense in Portland, Oregon. A fellow colleague. We rep a high-profile person, and I believe you may be interested in covering on your channel. Perhaps we'd release a statement. How can I contact you? So send me an email. So I've got two emails. You can use either one. Send it to tips@rrlawaz.com. That's our tips line. If you want to send it to me personally, which I get the tips emails personally also, but I throw this out to everybody. My email is robert@rrlawaz.com. Feel free to blow me up. I read them all. Can't respond to everybody, but I do read them all. So thank you for that. Roma Sumor says, great show. Really enjoy your analysis. Keep up the great work. Thank you, Roma. Never mind the blackmail that exists for Hunter that could influence Biden's decisions. Do you think the media has an issue coming up with the censorship over Hunter Biden and such? Yeah, I think they have a big issue with it, which is why I think this is going to be a big problem. This was a story. So let me just speak personally about why I decided to cover this story. So those of you who are regulars here, I try, I have a slant. We all do. I try not to hide that slant too much, but I do try to put on my lawyer hat more so, a little tighter than usual, and, kind of keep that stuff out because we want to analyze the issues. And I've really tried to stay away from a lot of these political topics too much, right? I haven't covered the Flynn stuff too much, just, a little bit here and there. And this story I've really been avoiding covering. But when they start censoring us, when they start censoring the information from getting out, that just angers everybody. And it's like, all right, enough already. All right, it's time to get off the sidelines then. Okay, you don't want us to talk about it? We're going to talk about it. And I think they call that the Streisand effect. When they try to censor something, it actually magnifies everything. I think there was an incident with Barbara Streisand or something where she tried to get people or sued somebody to delete something, and it ended up spreading like wildfire around the internet because she was trying to clamp it down. The public's response was, oh, no, we're not going to let that happen. So I think there's going to be a lot of people like me who would otherwise say, yeah, it's all political gossip. It's political nonsense. It's all the noise that exists. We're seeing this stuff and saying, all right, look, you don't want us to talk about it. Probably means there's something really significant to talk about. And I can't imagine I'm alone in that. I would imagine there's a lot of other people who feel that way. All right. No one has ever answered my question on a live stream before. Thank you very much, man. I appreciate you and all you do. God bless you, dude. Thanks, Daniel D. Appreciate you being here. I am glad that you are with us. Gigi says, I was talking about removing a congressperson. So should that go over to the Supreme Court? I don't think so. I think that would probably overly politicize the Supreme Court about removal. I think the standard removal procedures now, just a regular impeachment process, I think it's working well enough as it should. King Brandon, good question though, Gigi. I haven't actually thought about that. My opinion is open to being changed on that. I've not taken a deep dive into that. So Lawrence AI says thoughts on day 4 of the hearing. I didn't spend a lot of time on it. I had it on in the background. I was watching all these different witnesses just go through their justifications or their rationales for why they want her or don't want her. The big crux of it was she's going to be a threat to abortion. The other crux of it was she's highly qualified, and the Senate is following precedent in getting her nominated. Even though the timeline is compressed, they are still doing, they're still following precedent. So it's both sides just trying to justify themselves with a bunch of witnesses. Quite frankly, I think the whole thing today was a waste of time. They know enough about her. We should get an up or down vote, and we will. It'll just take a little bit of time. All right. Can you discuss the legal issues if any of the social media companies acting as publishers while still claiming to be platforms? So I've heard a lot about this, but I have not taken a deep dive into that distinction. So I know Trump keeps saying repeal rule something or other that would actually make these different content providers be treated as publishers. So in other words, that they would be responsible for the content that they put out or not responsible for the content they put out. The analogy here is like, it's like a phone line, right? If you pick up your phone, nowadays people just grow up with cell phones, but when I was a kid, we had landlines. And so it'd be like if I picked up the phone and called somebody and the phone company said, no, you're not allowed to call that person. Like, how would that feel? Or I can call that person, but I can't talk about something. I'm allowed to talk. I'm allowed to call them and have a phone call with them. But if I say something to them, then they're going to disconnect the call because I'm not allowed to share that information. That would be insane, right? It's kind of what the social media companies are doing. And the telephone companies are saying, look, we're just a platform. People are using us to have a conversation, but we're not responsible for what is said on those phone lines, right? We could be responsible for everything. And so we're not responsible for that. So the laws have carved out these different rules for them to say, yeah, people can talk about whatever they want to talk about on your phone line, and we're not going to hold you responsible. But if the phone companies did get in there and they started monitoring that content and censoring it, well, then are they really just a phone provider anymore? Or are they a content publisher because they're curating content, they're allowing certain things through and other things not through, which is the same analogy that you would apply to these social media companies. Are they now becoming content curators? Are they becoming more like publishers and less like just this sort of generic platform? And if they're going to be censoring information, I think that they are going that way, and maybe a revisiting of those laws is appropriate, but I have not actually read the specific laws. It may be worth covering on this channel. It's a great question. The Democrats have so many problems, I could list them all day. Do you think the Trump administration is keeping the stock market high before elections? That comes from Lawrence AI. I really couldn't speak to that. I'm not a financial guru in that way. So I couldn't answer that other than just speculate. So I won't even try, but it's a good question. Okay. Rex Smith says, but the Democrats have so many problems, I could list them all day, but you have to start being honest. The Republicans are not fiscally conservative or responsible. I would 100% agree with that, right? The Republicans are a huge problem. I don't disagree with that. I don't know what they do most of the time. To me, they seem like just a different version of the Democrats. Both of them are spending us into oblivion. Both of them are trying to take away more, in my mind, civil liberties. Both of them are trying to do, limitations on our freedoms, and they're both big government parties. Neither one of them is a small government party. The Republicans like to claim they are, but they're just not. We've seen it. They say that time and again. We're small government, conservative, fiscal conservatives. Then they go to Washington and they blow out the budget with $3 trillion. It's nuts. All right. This cracks me up. So many people say we can list problems with the Democrats, but the Republican Party is not fiscally conservative. They're selling you a lie. Ma the Fox says, Matthew Doloff is going to be charged with second-degree murder on Monday, according to prosecutors. First degree wouldn't fit as deliberation, doesn't include impulse reactions. Interesting. Yeah, I released the Matthew Doloff video. I think that was Tuesday night, and it was first-degree murder at that time. And so the question will be, that's interesting that they're saying it wasn't deliberation. I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, deliberation historically has not been something that requires, I covered this when we read through the statutes on that video, doesn't necessarily require that you sit there and say, I'm going to write out my plan to murder this guy. right? You don't have to go to bed the night before, wake up and have a plan and call your friend and talk all about it. It's deliberation. And from my reading of that, we can go back and look at the statutes, the definitions from that statute. But my reading of that is it's more about I intended to do it. I thought about it. I made the volitional act and I went and I pulled the gun and I pulled the trigger. That's deliberation. You deliberate. It happens immediately, happens very, very quickly, but you're deliberating. Your body, your mind is saying, pull the gun, pull it out, get into a firing position, pull the trigger. That's deliberation. And I think it fits. We'll see. At R&R Law Group, vote libertarian. Cheers to that, my friend. All right, let's see. So we got another super chat. That one comes from Jose Santiago. Good to see you, Jose. Thank you so much for that. Appreciate you being here. Dwarden4 says, I wrote a post about ACB, how she isn't actually a true originalist. One of my friends, left friends, actually a law professor, thought I was supporting her and actually blocked me on Facebook. The hate for ACB is ridiculous. I have seen some very bizarre things from people. And sometimes it's like the more professional the person is, the more angry they get about things and the more sort of childish-like their reaction is. Have you noticed that? These really, really professional people, these upper class, PhDs, scholars, lawyers even. I got so many lawyer friends who are just acting strangely over this election stuff, over ACB and over the Biden stuff. A lot of them don't like what I'm having to say on this channel. It's been really funny to me to observe a lot of I've got I wouldn't say a lot of criminal defense attorney friends, but I do have some friends or some colleagues, I would say, who are criminal defense attorneys. And I follow them on social media and on Twitter and all the different places. And I've been seeing them, and it's weird. All these criminal defense attorneys are really anti-Trump. Why is that? Criminal defense attorneys, we want to help people who have been charged with crimes. Who's responsible, in my mind, and we've covered this at length on this channel, who is probably the biggest, the godfather of mass incarceration in our time, the only living politician, I think, who can claim that mantle? Who is it? It's Joe Biden. He's responsible for the 1994 crime bill and a series of other bills that all criminalize a lot of behavior. So my defense attorneys want Joe Biden to be in the White House, the man who's putting their clients in jail. And if they don't like Joe Biden, they want to support Kamala Harris, who used to be a prosecutor, who is prosecuting marijuana crimes for a long time in San Francisco and California as the attorney general. Why are they supporting those people? It's because they hate Donald Trump so badly that it's just overpowering their logic and their reasoning. So we see a lot of bizarre stuff, a lot of hate, a lot of wild activity. So somebody asked me for a snapshot right now. Do you think Trump wins re-election? Do you think Republicans keep the Senate? That comes from the Nito God. Do you think Trump wins re-election? Yes, I do. I think he does. I'll put that here on the record. We'll make put that stake in the ground. I do think he wins. I'm not sure, but I do think he wins. Polls don't look good, but remember, the polls didn't look good in 2016 either. Zach Wallace says, I'm not even a Republican. Just look at the policy, point blank, period. Compare and contrast the two. Republicans aren't even close to as fiscally irresponsible with their policies. I think that's true. I think that is true. While I understand that it's hard to deliberate hypothetical cases, the idea that you can't get any sort of opinion from a to-be justice is difficult on hearings. Yeah, that comes from Ma the Fox. It's very frustrating. I agree with that. And I've gotten a lot of feedback from my non-lawyer friends to that same effect. People are saying, well, she can't even answer that question. Therefore, it means that she clearly agrees with that. So somebody was asking her about the peaceful transition of power, and I think it was Cory Booker, and her answer was pretty weak on it, right? And the response was, well, if she can't even agree with one of the simple fundamental principles of, American democracy, that's disqualifying. That's their argument. And you can see that the Democrats were doing this throughout the entirety of the confirmation hearings. They were asking her these little questions, and they would take those questions and then they would just sort of keep adding on and expanding them. So they would take this really small, really narrow set of facts. Like Cory Booker said to Amy Coney Barrett, he said, listen, from me to you, just as two people, I know you're a mom, and what do you think about separating families? And so, he does this like, I'm a nice guy little shtick. And what's she going to say to that? Like, yes, you're right, Cory. As a mom, I would agree. It's not okay to separate children from families. And he'd say, oh yeah, okay, great. Well, you know that the Trump administration, he would latch onto that, turn this into this big political thing, and then she would be disqualified. Remember, the reason why they don't answer questions anymore is because one candidate did at one point. Robert Bork answered all the questions. He said, yeah, abortion's wrong, should be gone. And all of these things, he went through it. Constitution doesn't say anything about abortion. Therefore, it's not a fundamental right. It's gone. He goes on to the next one. It's gone. Goes on. It's gone. And he got creamed in the Senate confirmation hearings, in large part because he gave them a lot of fodder. So every single judge after that, Scalia came after Bork, and Scalia got confirmed like 93-0 or something. Not even an issue. He just flies right through. And after that point in time, you don't answer questions anymore. None of the judges answer questions anymore, because if they do, they're not going to get confirmed. And I think that's just a byproduct of our system, unfortunately, right? We want judges to be as basically as apolitical as they can be. So they are basically practicing their whole life to not say anything controversial. Amy Coney Barrett, we went through all of her scholarly work, all of her law review articles, all of her scholastic editions when she was a professor and so forth, all extremely bland, extremely boring, right? Like if I saw this woman's resume, I'd be like, that looks like one of the smartest, most boring people I've ever seen ever, because that's what it looks like. That's by design. That's not a mistake. I'm sure she's not a boring person. I think she's very impressive, and I would love to grab a coffee with her, right? Who wouldn't? But the point is, they don't try to be controversial. They do everything they can to avoid it so that they don't face those types of questions when they're going through this process. The Flynn case. So Benny Tuto says, Flynn case, Judge Sullivan and mandamus. Should he recuse? Can he be disciplined? Has a judge ignored a writ before? All great questions. The Flynn case has been a wild ride also. And it's like every which way we turn, there's some bizarre thing happening in the legal world, which is why there's so much to talk about on this channel. But the Flynn case, I mean, in my personal experience practicing, when I have had a prosecutor, so let's say a client comes to us, let's say General Flynn comes to us and he's charged with a misdemeanor, felony, crime, whatever it is. And we are representing him. We take it, we go to court, we fight. We go through the exact procedural position that he has gone through, and the prosecutor's office comes back and says, listen, we reviewed the case. We find that there's no basis here for moving forward. The government itself is going to refuse to continue to prosecute him. The job of the government is to prosecute people for crimes. If they're saying they don't want to move forward with it, and the defense doesn't want to move forward with it, never once in my career, we've represented thousands of people, had a situation like that where the judge says, that's too bad, we're going to prosecute it for you. In other words, we're not going to allow the government to stop prosecuting you. That's insane. We live in a system where we have three co-equal branches. The judiciary is supposed to just be the neutral arbiter. And if the government, which is the entity that's responsible for bringing the charges, declines to bring those charges, what basis is it of the judiciary system to tell them that they can't do that? It's a huge imbalance. I think it's highly improper, and I can't quite frankly believe that it's been going on this long. I think it's pretty absurd, and I think it's a pretty big injustice. Rex Smith says, from a purely historical standpoint, no one is ever nominated to try to confirm a judge this late in the process, not even Lincoln. The rules will change now. I think that may be true, and we talked about that. So I don't know about the dates. I think that's probably true. I believe you on that, unless somebody tells me differently. I would imagine that, yeah, it's been probably never happened where we get somebody nominated literally 2.5 weeks before an election. And I do think that it is going to change the game. It could be something that really backfires on the Republicans. People could go to the polls outraged that they rammed this through. And it could backfire. They could win the court, but lose the Senate and lose the presidency. So we'll see what happens there. If Ted Cruz was nominated, could he give straight answers on issues such as abortion? Yeah, so Ted Cruz would basically have to give answers because he's already been on record for those things. So they could ask him about those. He's already opened the door. In the law, we talk about opening the door. So if some things are off limits, like if you are say you're a defendant and you're going to trial, you don't have to take the stand. You don't have to take the stand and answer anything. It's not your job to disprove your guilt. The government has to prove it. And so if they can't meet their burden, if they can't present enough evidence to convict you, it's fine. You can go to trial. You and your lawyer could go to trial and just sit there and not say anything. I've actually seen lawyers do that. You could just sit there and say, yeah, no, I have no opening statement. I've got no questions, no cross-examination. I've got no evidence to present. I've got no witnesses to call. I've got no expert testimony. good luck, government, because they think that the case is so weak that the government just doesn't have enough to convict that person. So you could theoretically do that. All right, let's see some other questions. Oh, okay. So back to the last man. So the last man, his question was, if you are so on that point, if you are not answering questions. Now, let's say that defendant wants to go ahead and take the stand. So rather than remain silent, he wants to get up on the stand and start answering those questions. Well, at that point, he's opened the door. So now he has to talk. Now, if a prosecutor asks him a question, he's got to answer it because he's on the stand. So he can't then get up there and start invoking his right to remain silent. So it's sort of a similar thing with Ted Cruz. He's already spoken about a lot of these issues. So if he is now sitting in front of the confirmation hearing, all of the other senators will have a treasure trove of all the speeches and statements and bills he submitted and all that stuff to question him on. So at that point, he couldn't turn around and say, well, out of respect for the judicial process, he could do that, but he would be laughed out of the room. He wouldn't get confirmed at all. So I think it's more of a political response rather than a legal response, but he would certainly ask that. Could you please explain how answering the questions threatens the integrity of the court? I'm talking about the integrity specifically. So it's a great question. And Amy Coney Barrett actually did a pretty good job of answering this. I'm going to try not to parrot her answer, but here's why that's an issue. So when you're on the Supreme Court or when you're a judge, you're going through the process, it's really hard for you to comment on cases that would be active. If they're going to come before you, what you don't want to do is signal one way or the other to the litigants how you're going to decide. You want them to prepare their briefs without having the mindset that they're going to try to influence the judge one way or the other. So for example, let's say Amy Coney Barrett came out and she actually answered a question on abortion, right? And she said, well, look, I know I'm not supposed to answer these questions, but since you've asked me 57 times today, I am going to give you a little bit of an answer. Personally, I think that abortion during the first trimester is something that is abhorrent, and I think it should be banned and outlawed. Let's say Amy Coney Barrett did that, right? That would be national news. All women everywhere across the country would be, or maybe not all women, but a significant portion of the ones who are concerned about abortion would be up in arms over that. And so the litigants now, the people who are taking cases up to the Supreme Court, they would know exactly how to phrase their arguments for Amy Coney Barrett. They would go through and they would look at all of the different facts about how a first trimester baby can, feel pain, has a heartbeat, has all of these different things going on. And they would they would file their briefs, they would make their oral arguments, and they would do so in a way to win over the favor of Amy Coney Barrett. And the other side would be like, well, she's already made her decision on this. She's already said that this stuff is wrong. So she didn't even give our side a fair opportunity to even articulate the facts. So now think about the defense on that. So you have a lot of people supporting the prohibition of abortion. The people on the other side, they'd say, well, we're not even going to get our day in court. We're going to show up at the Supreme Court. All these judges have already made their decision. And what's the point? And so the idea is that the judges need to be impartial, and they really shouldn't even be coming up with an answer. So when they ask her about abortion, how would you deal with this? Or how would you deal with, sexual preference or any of those things? She has not even heard the arguments. She has not heard the facts of the case. She has not heard any evidence in front of her. There have been no oral arguments. And so it would be like her just spitballing and saying, well, coming up with these hypotheticals, and it just undermines the entire sort of process of law. It's supposed to be based on facts, reason, laws, and statutes. And if you're just sort of, talking about random things from random hypotheticals from random senators, that's not really how the law works. And so the judiciary, I think, would become a lot more political, and that would undermine the integrity. A big part of what the court and the judges do is they have to maintain the legitimacy of the judiciary. Remember, the judiciary, they can issue rulings and they can issue opinions and they can do all of that stuff, but they can't go enforce it. The only reason it's enforced is because the court is considered legitimate and the other two branches of government are responsible for the enforcement. The executive enforces that. And so if the court becomes too illegitimate or too, the integrity is compromised, they're going to have no force anymore. So a large part of it, what Amy Coney Barrett is doing, I think, is not just in her interests, but it's also in the court's interest. And so they're protecting the integrity of the court in that way. I know it's super unsatisfying to hear these great questions being asked and you want to hear her answer them, but you just can't do it. And I think it's for good reason. Ginsburg did it. Sotomayor did it. Kagan did it. Roberts did it. Gorsuch did it. Alito did it. They all did it. And so this is just how it works. So I think if you're asking specifically about integrity, it's somewhere within that bound of a long explanation there. Okay, some other questions. Anthony Kennedy got approved in 1987, 97-0. Wow. Okay, S. McKay says the issue with Twitter and other social media platforms censoring content is because they have the immunity. If they edit content, they become a publisher, then they lose immunity. Yeah, that's a good one. First time here from Amber, says very knowledgeable, enjoying your breakdowns. Thanks, Amber. Good to have you here. Appreciate it. Thanks for being here. Roma, the defense lawyers that just sat in the courtroom without opening statements, expert witnesses, did they win the case? Yeah, so you can win these. You can win those cases. So there's a motion that you can make sort of after the state rests. So when the state goes through and they present all of their evidence, you can file a motion. In Arizona, we call it a Rule 20 motion. So we say I move for Rule 20. The government they haven't stated a claim. They present it all. So like for an example of this would be a super easy example, right? But I actually won. I won a trial sort of this way. One of my earliest. One of my first trials when I was just a brand new lawyer, and it was great. It was great. I remember it. I was going through this. It was a criminal speeding trial. So in Arizona, we have what's called criminal speeding. You can be charged with a misdemeanor. You can go to jail for 30 days for speeding, and it's not that fast. It's if you're going over 85 miles an hour anywhere. So we have these interstates that are 75 mile an hour zones, like if you're going from Phoenix to LA or Phoenix down to Tucson. Most of the road is 75. Nobody's going 75. Everybody's going 95 or 105. But in Arizona, if you're going 86 in a 75, that's a crime. They'll charge you with a crime for that. And it's different than a speeding ticket because you have the rules of criminal procedure. You have beyond a reasonable doubt. You have the right to present evidence and cross-examine witnesses. So we have a lot more tools in our belt than we would if we had a civil case. So I was in court and I was going against this officer who was not friendly. I try to negotiate with these officers when I go into court, and I was talking to him and I said, "Listen, officer, I know we're scheduled for a trial right now, and I'd love to negotiate this out. Can we just make this go away? I know you don't want to do a trial. I don't want to do a trial. Our client doesn't want to do a trial. Can we just drop this down into something lesser? We can make this go away." Officer said, "Absolutely not." He was kind of a jerk about it. "Absolutely not. Your client was this, your client was that." All right, it's fine. Let's go do this trial. We go through the trial. The officer goes, the government presents their evidence. Everything goes forward, talks about our client, talks about the speed, talks about the location, talks about all this stuff, presents their entire case. But they missed something. What did they miss? They didn't say that my client was the one who was driving the car. So they were talking for an hour and a half about speeding and radar and all this other stuff. And they kept saying the name of my client, like John Smith. Well, John Smith was this, and John Smith was that, and John Smith did this, and John Smith was that. And he was driving this car and all that stuff. But they didn't actually identify him by his driver's license. And they didn't say that during the arguments. So what they need to do is prove that the person they're prosecuting is who they say they are, right? So in that situation, I could have had a totally different client who was sitting next to me. I could have had somebody that was not even in the car that day, and they didn't identify him. So the officer didn't say, "Yeah, I pulled out his driver's license. I matched the driver's license to the photo ID. I matched the photo to the person in the car. Yeah, it's the same guy. Is that guy sitting in court today? Yeah, he's right over there, and he's him. Yeah, any objection to identification? No, we all agree that we're prosecuting the right guy here. Yeah." They missed that whole part. So they can talk about speed, they can talk about radar, calibrations. The officer's been doing it for 200 years, doesn't matter. Everything could be fine and well and good, but they didn't get identification. So now I was a new lawyer, so I didn't just not ask any questions or present any evidence. I was like, "Oh, shoot, I think they missed something pretty big here," but I still have to present my case. So I did. I presented my case, presented my evidence, and then the judge said, "Okay, at the conclusion of the arguments, what do you, any motions?" I moved for what's called a directed verdict, and they granted it. So we got a not guilty. We got acquitted because the government didn't explain their case. They missed the identification. And it was the right result. Our client wasn't going that fast. It was a young kid. It was the right result. It was a good thing. So it worked out and it was fun. But truthfully, in that situation, I could have not even said anything. I could have just said, no, Judge, I moved for Rule 20. I moved for a directed verdict. And the judge very likely would have granted it at that point in time. Okay, some other questions. Here from Montreal, second year law school. I'm loving this channel. Keep it up. Thanks, Lawrence. I appreciate it. Thanks for being here. Second year. Almost there, my friend. Keep going. Excited for you. It's good. We have two 2Ls who are also here. And I just had a couple meetings with them. Awesome. So excited for them. They're getting ready for bar prep, character and fitness, wrapping up this semester. So they got a big stretch coming up. So do you. But it's all worth it. It will be good. Ryan Durbin, wouldn't answering position on Roe versus Wade during confirmation require a judge to recuse themselves to protect the integrity of the court since an opinion has already been rendered prior to the hearing of the case? Yeah, practically that's right. They can no longer be impartial, so then they would have to recuse themselves. They've already made a decision. If they've pre-decided something, then they can't be on the case because they haven't heard any evidence yet. And you want judges to hear the evidence before they give opinions and make rulings. Lawrence says we're doing civil law here in Quebec. Angry Widow of Navy SEAL says, I may not always agree, but much respect to you, R&R. Thanks, Angry Widow. Yeah, and that's perfectly normal. I would expect that. I don't even agree with myself all the time. So you're in good company out there. Character and fitness is harder than the bar in North Carolina. That comes from Chris CC. King Brandon says, Mark Esper was talking about the threat of directed energy weapons from China and Russia. Trump is constantly hinting at military technology he can't give details about. 2020 is so very interesting. I had not heard that. Yeah, I had not heard that. Mark Esper, that name rings a bell, but I'm not real sure who that is. All right. All right, everybody. Well, listen, I want to thank you so much for being here. You know, I know that the news is moving so fast and there's so much to talk about. So we will be here. What day is today? Today is Thursday, which means I will not be here tomorrow. I know, it's terrible. I'm going to miss it. But we are actually going out. We're taking the team out to a team building activity. And it's sorely needed. So I'm going to be out of the office tomorrow afternoon. So I will not be here with you. I may do a live stream after our outing. I don't know. But I can't promise that just yet. So I want to thank you for being here. If you see one of the notifications pop up, that means I'm going to be going live. I would love to have you back on here tomorrow. Otherwise, if I'm not, I will see you next week on Monday. As a quick reminder, if you know anybody you love or trust and anybody needs help with a criminal charge in the state of Arizona, that's what we do. That's our day job. We'll take very good care of them. We love helping good people through the criminal justice system get their lives back on track. And so I want to thank you once again for being here. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for sharing the show. I really appreciate when you share it because unfortunately, some of the things that we talk about on this channel are just a little bit, they're a little gruesome sometimes and they're a little bit difficult to watch. So YouTube gives us that age restriction, which means they won't put us in the watch next or the recommended next channels and all that stuff. So a share would be very much appreciated. One more time, we'll say bye to Miss Faith. Thank you, Miss Faith, for helping us on the PowerPoint today. Thank you for being here. Really enjoyed it. Great conversation. So excited that you're here and look forward to seeing you on the next one. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.